Yes, welcome once again. Start of another week here on Cannabis News with Joe Klare's June 11th, 2018, presented by the Marijuana Times, of course. Go check us out, marijuanatimes.org. A bunch of great articles over there. You can also click the video tab at marijuanatimes.org or on marijuanatimes.org, and you can find every episode of Cannabis News. Go check it out. You can also check us out on Vimeo, vimeo.com/marijuanatimesx, or search the Marijuana Times, of course, on Vimeo. You can also search the Marijuana Times on Apple Podcasts to get the audio-only version of the show. Search us on there. For those of you on the go today, talking about people's moral feelings, whether they find cannabis morally acceptable and whether or not that should matter. Also, the latest out of Florida when it comes to the medical marijuana program there. We've been covering that a lot. A lot of stuff, a lot of drama. It continues. Also, speaking of drama, some news from Trump from last week and his feelings about cannabis legalization, or at least specific legalization legislation that may be working its way through Congress. All that coming up. But first, of course, Cannabis News is brought to you by Nature's Side. Check out the organic, all-natural pesticides, nature-side.com. Side is spelled CIDE. If you are a cannabis grower in a state where it's legal, obviously there's regulations. There's probably pesticide regulations, what you can use, what you can't use. Don't use harmful chemicals. Grow safe and poison-free, and be regulatory compliant with Nature's Side. Go check them out, nature-side.com, a proud sponsor of Cannabis News. This first story by yours truly over at marijuanatimes.org. Most people find marijuana use morally acceptable. Should that matter? A new survey came out last week from Gallup, a new Gallup poll. And basically it was a list of, I guess, quote-unquote vices, what people would consider as vices, and whether or not people find them to be morally acceptable. Alcohol was way up on the list. People really, they dig alcohol, as at least as far as when it comes to moral acceptability. Cannabis came in ahead of things when it comes to moral acceptability, like the death penalty, abortion, and pornography. 65% of respondents said they found marijuana use morally acceptable, which is kind of even with some of the legalization polls we've seen. So it tells you that, not surprisingly, a lot of people are linking whether or not they find something morally acceptable to whether or not they think it should be legal, at least in the case of marijuana. And that's great. As I say in the piece on marijuanatimes.org, that's great, and it matters because if that's what's driving people to vote for legalization in these states where they are, if that's what's driving people to call their congressman or show their support for legalization to their representatives and the state legislators, if the moral acceptability is driving that, that's great, and that's what needs to happen because of the way things are set up. But again, as I point out in the article, and there's a theme I've had in this show, or talked about in this show quite a few times, kind of one of the running themes. The only reason marijuana should be legal is because the people who use it, grow it, and sell it are not infringing on the rights of anyone else. All the other stuff, the tax revenue and undercutting the black market, and it's safer than alcohol and tobacco, all that stuff is great. But none of it is the reason that it should be legal. So many people focus on one or other of these aspects, like, oh, well, when we need to solve racial disparities and arrests for marijuana. Yes, of course, that's great. And you do that by legalization. If all the arrests for marijuana are zero, there's zero for each race, there's zero for each gender. It's all very equal. That's great. But that's not the reason for legalization. The reason for legalization is the people who use it, sell it, and grow it are not infringing on the rights of anyone else. Therefore, they are not criminals. So it shouldn't matter at all what someone thinks about whether or not someone like myself uses marijuana. It shouldn't matter at all whether they find it morally acceptable or don't find it morally acceptable. That's why we have that line, or we used to have that line at least, to where if you're not infringing on the rights of anyone else, you're not committing a crime. We crossed that line a long time ago. Now moral objections become the basis for laws. And it's been that way in this country for quite a long time. It's been that way in the world for quite a long time. Something that we need to get away from. Like I said, that line is very important. The line of, you're not infringing on the rights of anyone else, therefore you're not a criminal. Because once you go past that line, anything can become a crime. Anything. If enough people find it morally objectionable, it can become a crime. If that's what you're basing it on. You shouldn't base it on it, but that's what we are. So in the end, it's good news. Polls like this are good news, but it is my belief that I've expressed many times on the show. It shouldn't matter. Your opinion of cannabis use, what you think of it, is yours to have, and that's great, but it should not have the force of law in any way, shape, or form. This next story, out of Florida. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in Florida. From MiamiHerald.com, judge halts Florida's attempt to stop patients from smoking medical marijuana. If you've been following the story here on the show, like I said, we covered a lot because there's always something going on in Florida. They just can't seem to get it together. This is from last week. In a second stinging blow to Governor Rick Scott and the Florida legislature, a Leon County Circuit Court judge Tuesday lifted an automatic stay on her ruling that the state's ban on patient access to the smokable form of medical marijuana is unconstitutional, where we reported last week on this show about the judge in this case, Judge Karen Gievers, striking down basically what the legislature put in place after medical marijuana was passed in Florida, saying that smokable marijuana was not allowed. John Morgan, the guy who bankrolled medical marijuana and the amendment in Florida, and others stepped forward and said no. It specifically says in the amendment that public smoking is prohibited, which implies, obviously, that private smoking in your own home is allowed. If there was going to be no smoking, they would have just said no smoking, no smokable marijuana. But because they specifically said no public smoking, that means that private smoking is okay. That's the way English works. So they would have said no smoking if private was banned. She gave the state until June 11th to put in action a process that will make smokable marijuana available to patients at marijuana dispensaries throughout the state. She said that the state's attempt to delay the implementation of her May 25th ruling created an irreparable harm to patients. Now, yeah, basically after she made her decision, the state of Florida appealed within minutes of the decision. Gievers wrote in a 4-page ruling, quote, first, they cannot legally access the treatment recommended for them. Second, they face potential criminal prosecution for possession and use of the medical substance. So Florida, I mean, between these lawsuits and the Department of Health not getting it together at all when it comes to getting regulations going for medical marijuana, it's been a slow start. They're signing a lot of people up for the medical marijuana program. And, as soon as they and they have some dispensaries, they're a very small dispensary system that's not going to be able to handle, the demand that's coming as far as patients. Estimates are around 100,000 patients, 1,300, 1,400 doctors in Florida as of right now. This really spur things along, especially when it comes to having more patients. More patients come on board, they need more doctors, they definitely need more dispensaries and more access points for patients in Florida. Last week we also mentioned the States Act by Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Cory Gardner. Why did I call him Rory? I don't know. Cory Gardner from Colorado. She's a Democrat. He's a Republican. We mentioned Gardner before here on the show. He basically took on Jeff Sessions. He blocked a lot of Department of Justice nominees until he had assurances from the Department of Justice and Trump himself that they were going to lay off state legal medical marijuana, state legal marijuana businesses. This was all, of course, in reaction to the rescission of the Cole Amendment back in January by Jeff Sessions and the Department of Justice. Well, anyway, before Trump went up to the G7, which has been making a lot of news over the weekend, this is from LATimes.com. He said we likely support ending a blanket federal ban on marijuana, a major step that will reshape the pot industry and end the threat of a Justice Department crackdown. Trump's remarks put him sharply at odds with Attorney General Jeff Sessions on the issue. The bill in question, pushed by a bipartisan coalition, would allow states to go forward with legalization unencumbered by threats of federal prosecution. Sessions, by contrast, has ramped up those threats and has also lobbied Congress to reduce current protections for medical marijuana. And it's, Trump going up against Sessions is just, as I said last week, just icing on the cake just for the whole thing. Because obviously Jeff Sessions has been a thorn in the side of medical marijuana, and he seems like he's been a thorn in the side, at least from a lot of the tweets, the thorn in the side of President Trump. Trump made his comments to a gaggle of reporters Friday morning just before he boarded a helicopter on his way to the G7 summit in Canada. His remarks came the day after the bipartisan group of lawmakers proposed their measure. As I said, Cory Gardner, who's talked quite a bit with Trump and has seemed to influence Trump quite a bit on this issue. So congratulations to him. Trump, when asked about the bill, said, quote, "I support Senator Gardner. I know exactly what he's doing. We're looking at it, but I probably will end up supporting that. Yes." Which is pretty incredible. I mean, first of all, having the president support it shows people in the Republican Party that maybe there's something you should get on board with. Maybe if you want to kiss Trump's butt for whatever reason, now would be a good time to kind of get behind this and not make him look like an a-hole on TV by saying, "Yeah, I'm for this," and then it dies. So that'd be a little impetus to people in the GOP to kind of lawmakers to kind of get on board. Also, it tells you that at the end of this process, they go through all the trouble of passing this measure, and it takes the long journey from a thought to getting to President Trump's desk. That it all won't be for nothing. That it's not facing a roadblock when it gets there, but someone who is going to welcome the bill and sign it into law after all the trouble to pass it has been put in. So that's good. Keep making your voice heard. Whether how much it influences Trump, who knows? As I've said before, Trump is very unpredictable. What influences him from a day-to-day basis is unknown, but we can do our part by continuing to put pressure on the federal government. At the very least, is moving things in Congress, and maybe that'll put additional pressure on Trump to keep his end of the bargain. Help us get this through, sign it, let the states do with marijuana policy what they want without federal interference. That is what is needed more than anything right now when it comes to legalization. Is the federal specter needs to be removed and allow the states to do what they're going to do. It'll increase legalization, and it'll increase the speed with which it happens, and it'll increase the speed with which it improves in states that already have legalization. So hopefully this continues. Hopefully Trump gets. I hate to use the word ally on this, but there's really not a better one when you're talking about trying to get some through the federal government. At least at this point in time, they may change in a couple of years, but we'll see. For now, Trump is it, and that's what we need to keep working on. Thanks, everybody, for checking us out. Cannabis news, beginning of a new week, as I said. We're doing it here 5 days a week, spreading the truth about cannabis, doing our part to amplify the voices of the cannabis community and bring you the news and information you need. Check out marijuanatimes.org. Click that video tab for the shows. Check out the articles. Nature-side.com, proud sponsor. Organic, all natural pesticides. Go check them out. Nature Side. CID is how you spell side. Thanks, everybody, for checking it out. This show, liking, commenting, sharing, all that stuff. Please continue to do so. We'll see you next time on Cannabis News.